Professor Steffen, let's start with you, as you were shown in the video. The Swiss camp in Greenland is 25 years old. You describe how literally the ice is melting below your feet. Was this what you expected when you first got there?
First of all, thank you for the introduction, and I have a small correction. I'm not on travel 50%, it is less. Okay. I think I would like to start with a graph I have in the background here that shows 25 years of measurements from the Swiss camp. Swiss camp is a location on the ice sheet about 1,100 meters above sea level, and we placed it there in 1990 to study the interaction atmosphere-ice. Longer term, we expected to do that for 3 years, but after Mount Pinatubo exploded, the Arctic got colder, got actually 1.5 degrees colder than the annual mean, and because of the constant snowfall, we could not take the camp out. And during that time, I already moved to the US, and the program manager in the US said, we could actually support you by having this station around for another year. And I was smart enough to sell him the station for $1 US, and he had to fund it for the next 25 years. And I have to admit, the station is still funded through the US, even though I'm actually back in Switzerland. The story is, when you look at the graph, up to 2000, and what you see in the background is the mean, the mass balance cumulative. Input of snow minus the melt. And if the curve is hovering around zero, means the ice sheet is not losing mass. And you can see after 2000, the curve is slowly moving down. And up to today, we already lost 12 meters of volume of ice. And the first graph, you can see how this actually happens to the station. We had the station on stilts. They were about 10 meters into the ice. And it was on that time that the station fell over. We had to replace it. I had very good grad students. And the next slide shows you we were able to rebuild the station the same season, but we didn't really anticipate the ice is going down. The next slide shows you what happened actually the following year. The entire station fell down. It was an indication we are no longer safe in this kind of an environment. But needless to say, we rebuilt the station in the next slide. And you only see the surface because the station is built on the surface, 10 meters of big poles into the ice, in the hope Greenland will not continue to melt. And unfortunately, as you can see in the next picture, we were taken by surprise. This is the following year. Within 1 year, we lost 3 meters of ice. This is only one location, and I will discuss more what happens with that water. The latest picture is actually the picture from this summer. I was lucky enough to go there together with Al Gore. We finished part of a movie, we did science, and this is no longer sustainable. So I decided this station is open for sale. I take the bidding. There is an exhibition at the end of this corridor called Base Camp. So after this session, I take open biddings who want to actually get involved in the future Swiss camp. The big question is what happens with this water. And in the next slide shows you a summary. We're actually losing today 365 cubic kilometers of ice. It's hard to imagine how much that is, but I put it here on the graph. This is 6 times the volume of all the glaciers we have in the Alps. We use annually, purely by the surface melt, when the fast motion of the ice into the ocean breaks up. This actually is amazing when you think 1 millimeter global sea level just from the Greenland ice sheet, but we know from our measurements it is actually warming by about 3 to 4 degrees since we started the measurements. The last slide that is shown here shows you the sea level contribution from glaciers from ice sheets. And if you put it together, I was on the IPCC report and made this graph. Currently, the glaciers in red are the major contributor to the sea level increase. But we already know they actually contributed from 1990 to present 14 millimeter. There is only 45 centimeter ice left globally in all the glaciers compared to sea level. And we know by the end of the century, about 70% of all the glaciers and small ice caps have been melted. The big two sleeping giants are Greenland and Antarctica. And when you look at the green curve, which is Greenland, this is accelerating. And it is predicted by about 2100, we will have about 1 meter upper level global sea level rise. That is assuming a temperature increase that is below the COP21 agreement. And unfortunately, I have to say, it is great to have a COP21 agreement, but it doesn't go far enough, because 1.5 or 2 degree global warming means 4 to 6 degrees global warming in Greenland, which will make sure Greenland will melt over the next thousands of years.
You spend, as I said, a lot of time. We won't define how many percent at your institute. Now we're beginning to see how the Alpine region and the Arctic are important to learn from each other in comparative terms. Was the Swiss perspective useful in other ways too?
I showed that actually on the next view graph that shows just the summary for Greenland. I think it's important, and that was shown by State Secretary from Switzerland, Rossier, that our third pole, which are the Alps, that's where we develop and test our expertise, our science. And I'm happy to say, when you look at that line, de Carvin was the first explorer that crossed it all the way. His son was my teacher at ETH. My first snow physics class I took from de Carvin before he retired. So there is a linkage, and he was actually very good. That was one of the reasons why I entered that field. I was first an electrical engineer and then decided science in Greenland is much more fun than engineering. Okay, I'm not going there. What you see here is international collaboration. And it's important to say that science does have no boundaries. All the points on the map are international research camps. One nation builds it up, but invites all the others. And I think the important point is here, we all work together on the same issue, understanding the past, learning the present, predicting the future. And there is so much information in this research. And in the next slide shows you actually one of the summaries, what we can learn. This gives you the sea level curve for the last 140,000 years. It's based obviously from sea level research, but also from the climate record in the ice cores. We do know sea level was about 1 to 2 meters higher, 3 meters higher, 140,000 years ago, when the climate was 2 degrees warmer. The temperature we expect to have by 2100. And that is also a lesson we can learn from the past, and that information is actually in ice cores. It is in the area where we do the research. Back to your question, Stefan, yes, we actually learned a lot by doing the research in the Alps and then use that information for the future. My last point is, before I hand over my mic, is data exchange is, I think, the key issue here. And I would like to make that point. We all collect information as scientists. We are not very good with sharing some of the information. That was one of the summaries from the White House ministerial meeting last week. We want to share the data in the future more openly. We will want to make it available for the community, and we want to make it available within 1 year. And for that is also an important session tomorrow afternoon about the state of the remote sensing community. That is tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Steffen. Now to Professor Finger, perhaps a question to you. Just in a few words, what is the Global Arctic Project?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the Global Arctic Project originally is an initiative by my friend Lassi Heinen from Finland and myself.
Who's also here.
Based, and you will meet him later, based on the Northern Research Forum and the thematic network on security and geopolitics of the University of the Arctic. It is a totally interdisciplinary research and education project, and is based at, and Konrad Steffen mentioned this, it's a network of scientists of today 39 universities, most of them in the Arctic, but many others like mine interested in Arctic matters. I think the strength of the global Arctic is really the framework that we are offering. The framework that consists in saying what happens in the Arctic is of global origin, and what happens to the Arctic is of global origin. Whatever happens in the Arctic will have global consequences.
Related question to you as to Konrad Steffen. Any parallels between the transformation in the Arctic and the Alpine region?
Of course. I mean, the fact, I mean, this kind of global approach shows you that the same forces are in operation in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, in the third pole that are the Alps. We just talked about the receding ice cover, the consequences that all that has on permafrost, landslides, habitat. You can see this in the mountains in exactly the same way as you can see it in the Arctic. There are many other things, species, migration up north or up the mountains, but at some point it will be finished. And there are, I mean, there are many other things. I reminded myself the other day that the first fact sheets on the consequences of climate change were written by myself in 1989 for UNEP, for the United Nations Environmental Programme. And maybe just to say, this is not just the Alps, this is the Andes, the Himalayas, we're all in the same boat.
Thank you. By the way, this picture here, or these three pictures, the Trift Glacier is in the Canton Bern in the Swiss Alps. Your work, as I indicated in your introduction, is focusing on the interaction of issues, energy, transport, resources in the context of global warming, comparing again Alpine regions and the Arctic. Can you tell us a little bit about your findings?
Yeah, I think that's where it is useful to have some overarching conceptual framework. And the framework basically says that the forces that we see are similar all over the world, but in particular in the remote regions. So, for example, here you have the picture of the quest for energy, a dam in the mountains, one of our big dams in the mountains. And needless to say that our mountains are dammed almost to the end. We would like to develop more water resources, but there is actually not much space left to build more dams. The quest for resources is global, be it water or energy or minerals for that matter. Or another example is, the sort of drive to make, maybe next slide, drive to make transport more efficient. On the left side, you see our highway through the Alps. People complain a lot about it. It's congested. Usually it's congested in one way in the early holidays and the other way in the later holidays. But I mean, it's really the same trend as we can see in the Arctic as the sea routes will open. And overall, I would say the same trends of urbanization. I mean, the Alps are highly urbanized, and we are now looking in our project also at the urbanization of the Arctic.
In certain ways, we're almost like a step ahead, also in the things that we didn't do right in the Alps as opposed to the Arctic. May I hand over the microphone to Dr. Paulsen? And your engagement in the Arctic goes back, as I said, a long time. You support a number of initiatives. Now you helped establish this spring the Swiss Polar Institute. Can you tell us in a few words, especially to our audience, what it is, what it does, and why now?
Well, there are two persons in my life who had a great influence on me in this respect. One was my Norwegian grandmother, and the other person was my school teacher, Miss Eriksson, in Sweden. My grandmother, being from Norway, always at bedtime gave bedtime stories about the Vikings, Olav Tryggvason and all the great Vikings, naturally Norwegian ones. And of course, my school teacher in Sweden, I can never forget it. She talked about the Vikings' cultural mission in Europe, how the Vikings were bearers of a culture and trade who spread from the southern Europe to the Atlantic. So that was the way I was brought up. So it was quite normal to follow in the wake of the Vikings. In doing this expeditions and trip, there's another aspect which I find fascinating and which confirmed my interest. It's the people you meet. I can say that as a businessman, I meet a lot of people, some of them quite strange. But in the doing polar explorations, that's in a league by itself. You meet people who are extraordinary and very, very unique. And you get into a completely different environment, and that's something I've been really hooked on.
Why do you think Switzerland is a good place to establish the Swiss Polar Institute?
Well, I think it's quite normal. If countries like Singapore, Korea, India has Polar Institute, I think Switzerland is more entitled to have a Polar Institute than most of the countries that have them today. So I think the word is obvious and normal.
And I think, I don't know who it was, I think it was Admiral Papp this morning who was talking about a shared icebreaker, and I think there's one question I will ask you now that is going in that direction. This December, the Swiss Polar Institute will launch the first grand project. Could you tell us about it in a few words?
Yes, I'm extremely pleased and happy that I've been able to contribute to this project. This is a project we have been looking at for many years. The visit of the subantarctic islands in one expedition hasn't been done for, I think, over 100 years. It's very, very complicated today because most of these islands are, of course, protected areas. So in terms of getting this expedition off its feet, it's not just the logistics, it's not just the ship, it's also getting the permissions, which is a greater challenge than anything else. Another aspect of this expedition is that there's a lot of lessons for people who are involved in research, deciding on allocation of funds for research. This project, I think, is extraordinary. It was last year, the decision was taken by the end of October. There was a call for projects. There were 100 projects coming in, 22 were chosen in January, all by the researchers themselves. So I think the lesson which can be learned from this project is that if you do good research, find good people to run them, give them money and stay away, let them do their job.
And on this slide, yeah, that's a good management topic there. On this slide, you can see the planned route that this project is going to take, and it's going to be, I think, the first circumnavigation.
I can say a few words about it. We will start in South Africa on the 20th of December, and the first leg, as you see, we go down, visit the French islands. And as you know, there are 5 countries that have islands around subantarctic islands. France, South Africa, Australia, the UK, and Norway. And so we're going to visit all these islands on the way. The first stop will be in Hobart, and then we will continue to Punta Arenas. And of course, I would say that probably the most interesting part is the last leg going back to Cape Town, where we will visit South Georgia, the South Shetland Islands, and these places.
And we thought if Norway can be an Antarctic country, Switzerland can be an Arctic country. I'm involved right now, as Professor Paulsen indicated, to get the permits, and this is indeed a very, very stark challenge. And I must make a compliment to my French colleagues. They were the first to come in with the permits. Mrs. Moser, we heard from the government, we heard from the researcher, we heard from academia. What about the wider Switzerland? Could you give us an impression of the importance of the environment in a global context for Switzerland and Swiss politics?
Well, I think we have had very nicely explained why we have similarities between the Arctic region and Switzerland. Switzerland is dominated by a very extreme landscape, the mountains, the glaciers, the snow areas, where you have seen before on the pictures very nicely. And this landscape has in a very clear way also formed our characters and our interests, our DNA, how it was mentioned in the entry speech from the State Secretary. And I think this fact has led to a very broad consciousness of the importance of environmental protection in Switzerland. I think we can say we have quite a high level, obviously. Obviously, as a member of the Green Liberal Party, I am not so happy. I'm not happy enough. I think we should do much more. But I think we have led to quite a high level. And what is very special in Switzerland is, you probably all know that we have a direct democracy in Switzerland. So we, on the main policies in Switzerland, people have to vote. They have to vote at least 4 times a year. So the main policies are all accepted by people in Switzerland. I think we started that. We obviously started much before, but one of the main entry points on these policies was in 1970s when we had to vote for the constitutional article in the constitutional article on environmental protection, which was accepted by the incredibly high rate of 92%. 92% of Swiss people said, yes, we want to go forward in this issue. And that was just a starting point. We have had lots of other votations on that, which is with Swiss people as a whole agree on the policies, and therefore that is a very strong basis also for our international engagement. And Switzerland has traditionally been always very much engaged in an international level on environmental issues, such as the Montreal Protocol, such as the Kyoto Protocol, such as the Paris Declaration. We have the Convention on Biodiversity. We have the Convention on Chemicals and Waste, which Switzerland has been always in a driving actor and very much engaged.
And more specifically on the Arctic, from your perspective, involved in the Swiss science system and Swiss politics, how would you explain from your perspective why Switzerland has been so committed to the Arctic?
Well, we have talked now about what are the similarities. I explained that the landscape of Switzerland, that the identity of Swiss people is highly defined by the mountain regions and the extreme landscape, all the vulnerability of the ecosystems we have in the Alps that are directly affecting Swiss people. And I think we can say also that Swiss people are very much concerned about that because we live it. We have seen the picture of the glaciers. We see what every year is happening. We have talked about the strengthness of our scientific community and what we have been doing in this area. I think by myself being a member of this community, I'm always impressed again what we're actually doing and what we're achieving. But there is something more, and I think that's very important also to mention. As a small country, as a very small country, we have been always very much aware that the big challenges in environmental issues, but also in other topics, we are never going to be able to solve by our own. We have always been very, very convinced about that, and we have always had a very big engagement in that. I think that's a very good basis that has been the basis for all the engagement I mentioned before in other environmental issues, and I think that's also the basis, one of the bases for our motivation in the Arctic region. And as a small country, we have also a very special democratic system, as you know, and we have a system which is called a consensus democracy. And the consensus democracy means that all the important players have to find together a solution for the big problems. They have to stand together and fight for a common solution and then go forward. And I think this culture, this political culture, the similarity to the Arctic region, as we mentioned it or named it as a vertical Arctic, which I find a very nice expression, and this strong basis of scientific and academia world, I think that's all a very good explanation and explains in a very strong way somehow also our motivation to become an observer of the Arctic Council. I think we all have to work together. That's going to be a strong actor to find these common solutions, to find solutions for the common challenges we are facing for this region.
Thank you very much. We are already nearing the end of our panel discussions. This was a very nice way of rounding this up. I think, Professor Steffen, you wanted to announce a very special event that's coming in the future.
Thank you. Yeah. I would like to announce, and that's probably known for a lot of you already, but I will give some flyers out. Switzerland will host the 2018 big polar meeting, which involves open science meeting for the Arctic and the meeting for Antarctic, and it is in Davos. For about 2 weeks, we'll host 2,000 to 3,000 people involved in polar research in both poles, and we also added the third dimension in it, the Alps. That is forthcoming. There will be flyers. It's the first time we have this meeting in Switzerland because we were not really part of that official community. And I look forward to see a lot of you there. And I hope all the scientists will be, of course, welcome besides policymakers. I think policymakers are always important to participate for this kind of a meeting because it's always a give and a take. I learned a lot about today. I was really impressed by our people from policy making, from the US, from Scotland, from France, you name it. And I think it's important that we work together on this issue because as we have heard several times, there is only one solution and we have to find the solution together.
Thank you very much. We are coming to the end of our session and we hope we could answer that first question, what Switzerland is doing in the Arctic and why. And you see the many connections that there are, both in the scientific sphere, but also, as our State Secretary has said, in the DNA of our people and the people here. If I would perhaps try to sort of sum up in a nutshell and to summarize, we could perhaps do that in 3 points. One, Switzerland and the Swiss, like the Arctic and its people, have a close and personal relationship to ice and glaciers. We are indeed the vertical Arctic nation and share many of the same challenges. And second, this almost emotional relationship is paired with Switzerland's cutting-edge innovation and science systems as one of the most innovative countries in the world. And this system draws the best to its universities, and it sends out its own, as we saw, to places like Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and the rest of the Arctic. And the Swiss Polar Institute will really play this crucial role of bundling this energy, coordinating it between the different schools and universities that are involved in the scholarship and in the operational projects in the Arctic. And third, Switzerland has been in the Arctic for a long time. And I think that's a very important point we would like to make. The Arctic is now sexy, but we're not joining a fashion. We've been there for a long time. And we are committed to it for the long term. Or if we go back to the origin, Mr. Rossier's words about Alfred de Kervin, Switzerland is indeed actually very much like him. By the way, it's this gentleman on the very right there. Switzerland is very much like him. He's very Swiss, but at the same time, he's very international. He's a little stubborn, as we are, and we're very perseverant. So if you take these messages home, we would be honored. And on behalf of the Swiss delegation, we thank you for having us here. Thank you very much. Now, we're way over time. I don't know if there are 1 or 2 very urgent questions that we could answer. We are neutral on the football issue, except that we are very proud to have Birkir Bjarmason in Basel. But other than that, there is one over there. If there's a microphone, okay. Please go ahead. If you could identify yourself and address the questions to one of the audience.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. My name is Rasmus Bertelsen. I'm the Barents Chair in Politics at the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. And I'm particularly happy to see this presentation as a diplômé, a research master from the Universities of Lausanne and Geneva, perhaps the most demanding and highest quality education I received anywhere. But you made an excellent presentation, an excellent case. But I think you missed a very, very important point in what Switzerland can contribute. Look at your own slide. Look at 4 languages. We started this morning with a very powerful message from Admiral Papp about inclusiveness and diversity, which was illustrated very well by Prime Minister Couillard of Quebec. And there's no doubt that globalization has to be multicultural and multilingual. And Switzerland has extremely powerful experiences and competences there. I remember as a master's student in Switzerland many years ago that going to Swiss national events like the Swiss Political Science Association, where conversations would go on in German and French at the same time, the fact that you can have a conversation between 2 languages where people can speak in their own language and be understood, that is a very, very powerful message. And that message of multilingualism and multiculturalism, that is, in my view, the most powerful contribution of Switzerland. So if I can just finish, I'd say that I'd rather bid on your language approach than on Professor Steffen's rather shaky real estate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps an answer by Professor Finger?
Thank you, Rasmus. Maybe I can just build on that. I'm very proud to say that Switzerland is probably one of the most global countries there is in terms of nationalities, economy, and all that. And you are right to criticize that we did not put that forward enough. I mean, as you know, EPFL, this university, we are ranked by Times Higher Education as the most international university. 90% of our PhD students are foreigners. 70% of our professors are foreigners. So we are really concerned about global issues. And it's more than a language issue. Actually, it's not just French and German. It's English has become one of the 3 languages now.
I think we take one more question here from the front row.
Thank you. Is there any...
French is fine.
French is fine, sorry. Donc maintenant que l'Institut polaire suisse existe et fonctionne, y a-t-il des projets de votre part pour profiter des infrastructures existantes au village de Ny-Ålesund au Svalbard, où vous savez qu'il y a des offres de mutualisation des stations existantes, notamment au niveau français? Je peux sur ce point m'avancer un petit peu, mais en tout cas, il y a des opportunités qui n'engagent pas des moyens très importants, puisque des infrastructures existent et qu'il y a là-bas des opportunités de collaboration, voire même davantage. Y a-t-il donc des projets de ce genre en gestation à l'Institut polaire suisse? Merci.
Konrad, is that perhaps a question you want to comment?
I can answer because we're actually starting the collaboration, and since the Polar Institute was just founded earlier this year, we have not made any decision where and what, but it's important that we actually collaborate, because Switzerland has not the intention to build its own research station, as you know. We want to be guests and want to have longer-term investments in some stations to build up the collaboration. I think the benefit of having a Swiss Polar Institute is collaboration among the Swiss and collaboration with our international partners, because that way we can actually participate, and I'm very proud to say that the Swiss government, as of this summer, I think, they authorized the Madrid Protocol. So officially, Switzerland can now participate in Antarctica. Theoretically, with a station, we have no intention, even though Swiss Camp is a shaky investment, I know, we have better investments, and I think we want to invest in future collaboration, not with our own station, but with our science, and that is our plan currently.
Thank you very much. I think people are heading slowly. There's one desperate last question I hear from back there. Okay, one very last question.
Thank you very much, Mark Lantain, Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. Thank you for an excellent panel. I'll keep my question very short. As Switzerland gets ready to reaffirm its application as observer to the Arctic Council next year, out of all of the very interesting topics you put forward, which do you think will be the main selling points? Thank you.
Now that's a tough one. Konrad, why don't you start?
I think the selling point is that we want to be part of the community. That was very well shown at the White House Arctic Ministerial meeting, where we were invited, not even being part of the Arctic Council, but we are part of a community. And I think the community itself is strong enough to lift the average up, but we want to be part of that because international collaboration is only possible in that kind of the world. When we collaborate logistically, it's too expensive for individual countries to run their own logistics. We need to collaborate on it. But we also have our strengths. We can actually help with data dissemination, with big databases, and I think the common idea is there. We want, from the scientific view, there is no question we want to be part of it. And the political view, I'm happy to pass on to our member from the parliament. But
I can take that.
Shall I?
No, sorry, if you want to say a word. Right.
Well, we try to explain basically why our experience tradition on international engagement on environmental issues is important, and why we think that it is we could play an important role also as an observer. I explained that we have the political culture of consensus that I think is an important basis for the collaboration to find a common solution in this institution of the Arctic Council. And I explained also that as a small country, we have a very long tradition in finding solutions for big challenges as one player and taking like this burden-sharing responsibility in a bigger context. I think there are, together with our landscape or the Alps as a vertical Arctic and our scientific basis that has been just explained is a very good basis and explains very well our motivation to become an observer. Thank you.
Let me just perhaps in closing add something from my own experience. As I'm been traveling around for the past 2 years among the countries of the Arctic Council, the point was actually that in terms of substance, everybody is telling Switzerland it's a no-brainer. And everybody tells Switzerland, you've got all the qualifications and you meet all the criteria to be an observer at the Arctic Council. But as you know, unfortunately, there are some other elements playing into these decisions that we cannot influence from the outside. So there we go. We hope, though, that there's going to be movement and that we are looking and that the Arctic Council people and membership states are looking at more of the substance than the politics. So we're actually quite hopeful in that regard. With this, and I have one more important information to give you, and then we close. After this session, now you're invited for lunch that you have been waiting so patiently for, back at the Swiss Camp exhibit that is there. It's going to be there for the whole Arctic Circle conference. Food and drinks will be served. It's a wonderful interactive exhibit, and we look forward to continue our conversation there. Thank you very much again.